seems like this has been months in the waiting and in the making, just kind of like the winter progressing into the spring, and all of the plants coming alive. So thank you, Susan, so much for joining us tonight on behalf of all the Friends of the Owyhee. So Susan Fritts got her Bachelor's of Science degree from Washington State University, and then has since worked for the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management throughout California and Oregon and Washington, the Great West Coast. And then in 2012, you sent us, so you started in 2012 at the Vale District BLM. She moved with her family over here, and then says that she's really enjoyed working on the vast diversity of plants growing in this unique landscape. And of course, part of that unique landscape, I imagine Susan's talking about, is the wonderful Owyhee watershed and volcanic plateau. So thanks for joining us tonight, Susan. And I think in the spirit of Forb collection, we're hoping in June to have a stewardship opportunity collaboration with Susan and the Vale District BLM to collect some native Forb seeds. So stay tuned, of course, and keep watching our social media and whatnot for that. So, all right, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Susan, and I'll mute my microphone as well.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Sammy and the Friends of the Owyhee for inviting me to talk with you guys today about Forb seed collection. It's for me, it's a very fascinating topic. I love it. It's a passion that I've had for a long time, and the Malheur County and the Owyhee watershed has provided a wonderful opportunity for me to work with a broad diversity of species and to have this opportunity to collect Forb species, increase them, and do some restoration efforts with the seed. I want to start the talk today with just giving a huge shout out to Shane Palmer for helping me update my presentation today so that it is web ready and not meant for a large conference room. So thank you, Shane, and thank you for joining us today, this evening, for the presentation. I am going to share my screen. And if someone can just let me know if my presentation is up.
Yep, it looks great.
Excellent. All right, so tonight I want to talk a bit about this bi-state strategic native Forb seed collection and increase project I've been working on since 2015. By state, this is Idaho and Oregon BLM working together to do some seed collection. And we've got the beautiful Owyhee Canyon pictured here prominently. So why collect Forb seed now? Why do the increase now? And prior to 2015, which is when we started this project, there was very little focus on Forb seed increase within the government, within the Forest Service and the BLM. But 2015 was like a really prominent year for a lot of different policies and guidance to come out that led us down this path of Forb seed increase. The first, the Secretarial Order 3336 came out, which emphasized expanding the efforts to utilize native seed. We also, in 2015, had the decisions signed for the Greater Sage-Grouse Approved Resource Management Amendments for the 10 Western states. And these are amendments to the BLM office's resource management plans that changed the focus to be a conservation of sage-grouse and their habitat. So we really changed our focus to doing those conservation efforts for that species. And within that document, there was some guidance that really led us to believe that, you know, Forb seed is something we need to be thinking about. Specifically, reestablished Forb cover in areas where they have been reduced and they're below desired levels. We needed to increase plant diversity, an emphasis on use native plant materials for restoration and rehabilitation efforts, and to use provisional and established seed zones to determine appropriate seed sources. Another document that came out in 2015 that gave us some really good guidance was the National Seed Strategy for Rehabilitation and Restoration. And this was not just a government document. This was a document that was put together with private companies, nonprofit organizations, and the government to all sit down and say, what do we need to do to have a really solid strategy for restoration and rehabilitation? And this document highlighted the needs to ensure reliable availability of genetically appropriate material by improving agency and partner capacity to plan for seed needs by seed zone, and also to implement alternative seed production to augment wildland seed collections. And when we speak of wildland seed collections, that is taking the seed right from the wildlands, from out in the rangeland, and using it in restoration. And when you're looking at very small restoration projects, that's something that's doable because, you know, maybe 1 or 2 pounds of seed is what you would need. But when you're looking at really large projects, such as maybe some of these large fires we've had, if some of you remember the Soda Fire in 2015, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of acres. Wildland collection is not an option for being able to get that seed back on the ground during restoration. So we need to do these seed increase projects to have large amounts of seed available for these restoration projects. And so these workhorse species is what we wanted to really kind of focus on for these larger projects. So when we tie together all of these documents, we developed the goal for this project to have genetically appropriate forage seed available for restoration of greater sage-grouse habitat. Historically, when we were doing seed increase in the BLM, we were doing that by district. So you can see the different districts here that are within the kind of sage-grouse habitat area of our region. And it's not very efficient for each district to be doing their own seed increase. If I say I need some bottlebrush squirrel-tail grass increased for Vale, that's great. But if Burns does that same exact effort, they're putting in the same energy and the same money for the seed that they need. And then Prineville does the same thing. Each of us is doing our own small increase, spending a lot of money to increase that seed, because if you're asking a grower to produce a small amount, there's an investment in that, and that investment can be quite large. If we all work together and say, hey, we all need bottlebrush squirrel-tail, we need more pounds that we're asking from the grower, we can reduce the cost. So when we increase the supply needed from a grower, we decrease the cost. So we were trying to find these efficiencies that we could use. We know that these are tax dollars that are being spent on these projects, and we want to use the tax dollars as economically and efficiently as possible, because we work for the public. So while we were choosing the areas to focus for our efforts, we decided that the provisional seed zones that were put together by Bauer et al. Was really a good starting block. And some of that guidance came from some of those documents they were talking about previously. They kept mentioning seed zones. And the provisional seed zones are identified here. And you can see the different colors here with the zones associated with them. And how Bauer et al. Temperatures and combined that information with a combination of with aridity, which is a combination of annual heat and moisture index. And so we've got this first number here, which on this very first orange color here, the 10 to 15 degree Fahrenheit. And so you can see kind of our area here, the part of the Great Basin where we were working really substantially from the Oregon and Idaho partnerships. We've got the pink area, which is the 10 to 20, 6 to 12. And this is the Snake River Plain. If you guys are familiar with the different ecoregions of the area, Snake River Plain is probably the 20 to 25, 12 to 30. And so the seed zones are a very good way to identify where do we think seed from a specific colored area will be able to spread. We can take seed from anywhere in this pink area and we should be able to seed it out anywhere else in the pink area and be successful. So that's kind of the idea behind those provisional seed zones. Other factors we looked at when considering which seed zones to use were remoteness. So we've got this pink area, a lot of pink on here. We look at this remote pink area up here in Washington. We're looking at a completely different ecoregion up here. So it wouldn't really be wise for us to include them in our seed increase area. The other thing that we looked at were areas with the greatest need for restoration. And the purple polygons were the ones we were identifying. For sage-grouse, we had a lot of restoration needs. And so when we combined all of that information, we found that the pink area, which is the 15 to 20 degree Fahrenheit, 6 to 12 aridity seed zone, was our biggest bang for the buck, the most area with the greatest need that we could do seed increase and then use that seed for restoration. And so then when we looked what was logical, we identified that the Lakeview, Burns, Prineville, Vale, Boise, and Twin Falls districts of the BLM would be the best choices for working together to do the seed increase project. So now that we know where we wanted to collect the seed from, we had to identify the species that we wanted to collect. And if you've ever hiked out on the rangelands in the spring and throughout the summer, you know that we have a large diversity of species out there. And so we needed a starting point. And because we were focusing on doing restoration for sage-grouse, the logical starting document was a sage-grouse preferred forb list. And there were 64 species on that list. So that's still a large number of species to be choosing from. So other criteria we were looking at for the increasing the seed were species that are not currently in production. If we have growers that are producing a certain species, such as yarrow, that's one that is very commonly available through producers. We don't want to be spending an effort doing more production of that. We want to be doing production of species that would be new to be using in restoration because we're trying to increase the diversity out there. Another criteria that we were looking at was species found throughout the focal area. We don't want to be increasing and producing seed to be used for restoration that is only useful in Vale. You know, if Boise District and Twin Falls District and Burns District don't have that species, really we're producing something for Vale. And that's not meeting our criteria of what we were trying to do. A very important part of selecting the species was working with the growers and finding out which species they would actually be able to grow. Some species are very difficult to germinate. Some species are difficult to harvest, whether they have sticky plant material, which clogs up the harvesting machinery, or the seed develops at different times throughout the summer. And so it's very labor intensive to hand harvest instead of using a combine to do the harvest. We wanted to bring the growers in on that conversation because if we asked them to grow a species that was very difficult for them, the cost would be really expensive to grow out the seed, or they would just straight up say no, and then we collected all of the seed that can't be used for increase. And then a final criteria we threw in was making sure that the species were beneficial to pollinators. There's been a lot of emphasis in the last few years on pollinators and their importance in our ecosystem. And so we wanted to bring that in to provide another benefit. So once we applied all of that criteria, we got down to 6 species that we selected for increase. We had the mountain dandelion, the long-leaved hawksbeard, the creamy buckwheat. All of those are food species for sage-grouse. They're moderate to easy to grow, and we expect to have seed harvest in 1 to 2 years. And the growers did not feel that there would be any major issues with the growing. The other 3 species we selected were big seed biscuit root, hoary tansy aster, and sagebrush false dandelion. And they again had those same criteria that I discussed previously. So now that we know the species that we want to collect and the area that we want to collect them in, we needed to identify how much seed we needed to collect. And it's not just as easy as like, oh, we're just going to collect a pound of seed for every species. As you can see here, for each species, there's a big difference in the number of seeds per pound. So with Hoary Tansy Aster, it's the smallest seed of the 6, and it's 1 million seeds per pound. Whereas the big seed biscuit root, implied by the name, has a larger seed, and that is 35,000 seeds per pound. So having that information helps us understand how many pounds of seed we need to collect to get a certain number of seeds. The other thing we needed to think about was how much seed do we want to produce? And so using a lot of complicated calculations and help from the growers, we were able to identify how much seed we needed to collect to produce enough to provide enough for the growers for them to increase and produce the amount of seed that we were requesting from them. So we weren't asking for large amounts of seed. We were looking at getting about 50 pounds increased from them. So, you know, when we're looking at the mountain dandelion, we needed half a pound of live seed, which means the seed will germinate. And we needed half a pound of that to be able to get 50 pounds of seed in a 1 year of production. So then the biggest step is to get the seed collected. And there are numerous options for collecting the seed. We had 3 that we chose to use. The first one was contracts, where we actually hire somebody to go and collect the seed. We also utilized seasonal staff. So when we hire seasonals to work for us for the summer, we used them to do seed collection. And then we were able to use excess seed from previous seed collections to help augment what we've already collected to provide for the increase. And those excess seed collections are stored in various locations throughout the state. Sometimes they're at federal facilities. Conservation groups can do seed collections, and they'll just have little bits of seed that maybe they collected some for a restoration action and they didn't use all of it. And so using their databases, we're able to mine some seed that was available excess to add to our collections to get the amounts of seed that we needed. There are some really important logistics when you go out there and collect the seed. You want to make sure that every collection you make has its own unique collection number. Otherwise, all your data can get jumbled. You forget what's in what bag. You know, you maybe dated it, but you didn't give any other information on it, and you did 2 collections that date. You really need to keep track of where each seed was collected so that you can look back at that information. If you have a failure in growing in the field, you need to look at your data and find out what was unique about that seed that maybe had the failure from the increasing with the grower. And so it's all about having all of your data lined up and being able to reconnect the dots at the end. It's also important to use standardized collection processes and documentation forms. That way you have the same information for every collection. Again, so you can go back if you have a failure and say, what is different about this site than other sites? And 2 of the most important things are having proper storage. One, before you clean it, you need to have proper storage. If you are collecting seed throughout the summer and you just leave it in your vehicle, you are cooking that seed all summer. You're killing it, basically. So you need to have proper storage throughout the season before you send it into the cleaners. Usually we have storage within our warehouses that is like 80 degrees. And so that's appropriate for storing. And then you also want to make sure that you kill any pests that are in the seed before you send it in for cleaning. Because we usually send our seed in September. So if you're collecting seed in June and it's waiting till September and you have little bugs in there eating your seed, you're losing viable seed during that time. And you spent a lot of money collecting it, and you don't want to really lose any of that seed. After cleaning, it's really important to have long-term storage that has good constant temperature to maintain the viability of that seed. It can take a couple of years before we start producing the seed after collection. And so you want to make sure that it's in that stable temperature, stable humidity, so that you aren't killing off seed before you send it off to the grower. So with our 2016 collection efforts, we were able to get a number of collections made. I broke this out into what was collected by contractors and what was collected by seasonal staff. And it was really interesting. This data was like what I really geeked out on. It was so interesting to see the differences from a contractor and a seasonal collection. So you can see that the contractor was able to collect significantly more amount of seed than the seasonal staff. But when we look at the purity, which means how much of what they collected is seed, how much of it is sticks and rocks and seeds from other stuff, it is significantly lower with the contractor than with the seasonal staff. And then when we look at the percentage of live seed, so that means when they look at the seed that was collected, not the other junk, just the seed, how much of that is alive? And so again, it was significantly lower with the contractor than it was with the seasonal staff. What that resulted in was the pounds of live seed collected. When we look at the purity and the live seed and then do the calculations with the bulk seed, this is the actual live seed that can be used by the grower to increase. And so it was kind of disappointing to see that, you know, our bulk collections, we had 1.7 pounds of the mountain dandelion collected, but really only 0.4 pounds of that was live seed. Versus when we're looking at the seasonal staff collections, we lost very little of the seed, 0.02 pounds difference. So this is exceptionally good seed that the seasonal staff was collecting. And being responsible federal employees, we only pay for live seed that is collected. We do not pay on the bulk pounds collected. You know, a lot of this is junk, and we're not paying for that weight. We're paying for what is live and can be used for increase. So, you know, what could go wrong with all of this, right? Well, we learned an awful lot the first year that we worked on this project. While we thought that we had identified species that were located throughout the range and throughout that provisional seed zone that we identified, at least 2 of the species we identified had very limited habitats, such as the upper elevations of those seed zones, and there really was not enough sites available to collect and produce the amount of seed that we wanted. We also found that, you know, in a very dry year, there is a low abundance of plants or seed is available for collection. Those of you who live in the Great Basin, year for seed collection, a lot of plants didn't produce seed, or if seed was produced, it never reached full maturity. So those are the things that can really affect your seed collections. And then that low percentage of live seed from collections that we saw from the contractor. Those were just some things that we just really didn't expect, but we learned from them. New collections on with the hoary tansy aster and the false dandelion. And then using that information and looking through the data again, we decided to add Douglas's dusty maiden and 9-leaf biscuit root to our collection list in 2017. So after collecting the seed, the next steps were to write a contract for commercial seed increase. And Anna Halford with the Idaho BLM worked on a contract and has been really wonderful with running that contract for use throughout the BLM to increase seed. And then the next step was to start seed increase with those wildland collections that we made using that contract that Anna had written. And I was thrilled to finally in 2021 to get some seed back from the grower. It's a long process. We started in 2015. Finally, in 2021, we were able to get some seed back. So from that Douglas Dusty Maiden, we were able to get 20 pounds of seed produced, and the Hoary Tansy Aster produced 48 pounds of seed. This last year, we sent some sagebrush false dandelion to a grower to produce, and hopefully we get some harvest for that in 2022. So this is a large project, and we had a lot of people help us on it. We had Anna Halford from the Idaho BLM office, Nancy Shaw and the Great Basin Native Plant Project, Mark Musso, who has been retired for a few years from the Oregon BLM, Berta Udy with the Deschutes Basin Native Plant Seed Bank, Karen Burry and Grace Haskins with Oregon BLM, and Peggy Olwell, who holds the purse strings in Washington, provided a lot of funding for this project. If you are interested in more information on seed collection, Seeds of Success is a great resource. I should have checked these links out before tonight. I didn't, but Seeds of Success with the BLM is a great resource, and also the Great Basin Native Plant Project. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. That was super interesting, really informative, and just super fun to learn about. Great. Does anyone have any questions for Susan? I know there was definitely a lot of information for me.
I kind of had a super nerdy question. Like, hi, this is Becky in Boise. Do you have a lot of growers? Like, how does that work?
So we have, I want to say, since this is a nationwide contract, we have, I think, 10 growers on that contract. But some of them are very regional, and they don't want to grow nationwide. You know, maybe they're in Colorado, and they really want to focus on increasing seed for the Colorado species. But we do have a producer in California who is willing to produce for anyone. You send them seed and they'll grow it. And that is just what we have on the BLM contract. There are a lot of other producers out there who will grow seed. It is a very risky business, I will say. If it's something you're thinking of going into, it is incredibly risky. We do not have a steady need for the seed. Right now, our seed needs are driven by the fires that we have every year. So if we have a very large fire season, we have higher seed requests. And when we have a low fire season, it's lower seed requests. So it's not a stable business. It makes it very expensive and very risky to go into. And so those that do produce for us, we greatly appreciate that they're there doing that work.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Scott, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Oops, Scott, you're on mute. Scott, you're on mute if you want to come off. Oh, it looks like there you go.
I'm wondering if there's any way that volunteers, citizen scientists can help collecting seeds specifically. I work cheaper than a contractor.
Yeah, that was a great question. You would need to contact the local office that you're interested in working with and see if they have opportunities for you. Scott, I can't remember, where are you based out of?
Sisters and Malheur County, Harney County.
Okay, all right. I do know outside of the BLM that Idaho Fish and Game does seed collection efforts. Kind of in the Boise area, I know that in the winter they do some sagebrush seed collection parties, which look really fun, really cold, but really fun, where they're out there with garbage cans and tennis rackets, beating on the sagebrush, trying to get their seed into those garbage cans. But, you know, you might want to contact, with you being in kind of the Bend area, there's, you know, the Deschutes National Forest and the Prineville office. They may have opportunities for seed collection.
Okay. Good. You know, if I had a list when we went out, we're out a lot. We collect bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah.
As we find them.
And where it's really important to contact someone who you would be collecting the seed for before doing the collections is there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered and a lot of things to think about with the collections.
Cool. Okay. Thanks.
Great question. Stu, do you want to go ahead and ask yours?
Sure. I'm Stu Garrett from Bend, and I'm working with the Audubon Society and the Native Plant Society. Susan, a great presentation on a really important topic. I really appreciate what you've done. I am curious to know if you ever seed any grass seeds along with your forbs.
Definitely, yeah. And Stu, it's good to see you. We've met a couple of times, I believe. Glad to see you here tonight. So our workhorse species are the grasses. That is what we predominantly put out on the landscape. We normally will seed 2 or 3 species of grasses. Our workhorses are the blue bunch wheatgrass, the bottlebrush squirreltail, and the Sandberg's bluegrass. Those are 3 pretty common species to have in every single one of our mixes. In addition to those, we will add in the Forb species, and we do them in a much smaller amount. 1, because the seeds are much smaller, and 2, because the Forbs make up a smaller amount of plants on the landscape. So there are smaller abundance on the landscape. So we'll put grass seed out within that mix at about 10 pounds per acre, but we'll be putting the Forb seed out at about 1/10 of a pound per acre, using significantly less.
Thank you. One other question I have is, do you ever do any what we're calling interseeding, seeding the Forbs between the sagebrush plants? And if so, what mechanism do you do to do that?
So, so the 10 years that I've been here in Vale, I would say all of the seeding that we've done is post-fire. And unfortunately, post-fire, we don't have the sagebrush present because it's been burned off. So we've been doing mostly our direct seeding with either a seed drill, a rangeland seed drill that's pulled behind a tractor, or aerial seeding from an airplane. We are looking at opportunities to do some of that interseeding that you're speaking about, to increase the diversity out there, or to bring forbs even into some of these areas. When you've had conversions to a cheatgrass community where you've lost your native grasses and forbs, but you still have sagebrush around, and you want to be bringing in that native diversity, we're still trying to figure out all of the methods to use, because you just don't want to drag a drill behind a tractor through intact sagebrush. You want to try and keep that sagebrush there. So there's, probably the most common method to use would be to aerial seed in there. There has been some really innovative methods that they're working on using seed pellets with water pillows, all kinds of like really interesting technology that the agricultural research stations have been working on, especially the one out of Burns. So we're looking at the different technologies that are available.
Thank you.
Awesome. Scott, I don't know if you're looking at the chat, but Allison came up. Okay, got it. You saw it. Great. All right. Any other questions for Susan?
Susan, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the past, doing a little bit of seeding work after prescribed burn at Crooked River National Grassland, we included Lewis flax we're primarily seeding grass, but we threw that in as kind of a marker because it came up very visibly, and there we could see where our tracks were and, you know, exactly where the lines were that we'd seeded. And it has progressed through the years. It's continued to produce its own seed and reseed itself. But I don't remember if that's on the sage-grouse list.
That's a very good question. I'm trying to remember myself. One of the things with Lewis flax for the Great Basin is it is not really one of our prominent species. There are areas where that species is widespread, but it's not really one of our widespread species. It is readily available to purchase and put in seed mixes, but I have stayed away from that in our mixes just because it's not really a species that we have here. Another one that tends to be very readily available and used quite often in seed mixes is yarrow. What I've been seeing on the Vale District, the 10 years I've been here, is mostly we see that one in riparian areas. And so we can add it to the landscape, but we're kind of artificially creating a community when we start putting in species that aren't here. And so I try and avoid that. We can't always do that. Sometimes we have to substitute in something because a native species isn't available and we do need to provide something. So we will put in a species, but we make sure that it's not a species that's going to be invasive and start taking over. But we do sometimes have to compromise to get some diversity out there.
Thanks very much.
Great questions, y'all. Anyone else have anything else? All righty. Well, if that's all of our questions, let's give a huge round of virtual applause to Susan for presenting for us. Thank you so much for being here today, everyone, and Susan. Yeah, and hopefully you can join. Let's do this all again next month. Our programs director, Sammy, who's also here, who invited Susan, in fact, will be presenting on the importance of natural night skies, as well as, the basics of stargazing, and we'll be looking at the visible planets and things, so that'll be super fun. If you want to review this webinar, it will be on YouTube, most likely tomorrow. And I'll send out an email to everyone via Humanitix, where you signed up through, and you can review it at any time. And of course, we encourage you to get in touch with Susan if you have more questions or are interested. And you can just go ahead and send me an email and I will forward it on to her. Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, Susan. Good to see y'all. Good night.